Chapter 25:14, Not to be trifled with. Chapter 25:14, Not to be trifled with. As the dust settled on the battlefield, the watching players from the extreme light shelter, who had assumed that Shifeng's group was in for a bitter battle, were dumbfounded as they stared at troubled times embedded in the ground. Is he really a Tier 3 player? They had all felt troubled times' aura after he had taken on his demon form. It was strong enough to rival Grand Lords of the same level. Combined with the Berserker's profound combat techniques, he could kill Tier 3 experts with little to no effort. Tier 3 players had no hope against him. Only experts who had reached Tier 4 would have the power to suppress a monster like Troubled Times. And yet, Shifeng, who looked ordinary and didn't even have the aura of a Tier 3 player, had overwhelmed the Berserker with brute strength. Everyone watching felt as if the main god system were joking with them. He's actually this strong? When Purple Rakshasa and Graceful Monarch saw Troubled Times' embedded figure, their minds went blank. Although illusory words had told them that Shifeng was monstrously strong, even going so far as to insist that she was no match for the swordsman, they hadn't believed it. First, Shifeng had repelled 17 Tier 3 demonized experts with one move. Then, he had used another move that tore space apart and left Troubled Times heavily injured. The man's strength was simply unheard of. With just this ridiculous strength, Shifeng was more than capable of making fools of 100 Tier 3 players. When demonized, Troubled Times enjoyed inhuman basic attributes. If any other Tier 3 player had stood against Shifeng's attack, they would have instantly perished. In other words, Shifeng was powerful enough to instant kill Tier 3 players. There was almost no difference between Tier 2 and Tier 3 before him. At most, Tier 3 players were slightly stronger ants. Purple Rakshasa and Graceful Monarch now, more or less, understood why illusory words admired Shifeng, declaring that he alone could change the tide of the upcoming war. Sure enough, he's grown stronger. While illusory words watched Shifeng, who stood proudly among the Sentinel Shelter's players, she couldn't contain her bitter smile. After the battle on Dragonheart Island, the various superpowers had recognized Shifeng as a peerless monster, one not to be provoked, but they had continued their development since then. Adding to the fact that they had stronger foundations than Zero Wing, illusory words had been sure that she should have caught up to Shifeng a little. She had never imagined that the distance between her and the swordsman had grown. She had been humble when she had told Graceful Monarch and Purple Rakshasa that she wouldn't last more than 3 moves against Zero Wing's guild leader. In truth, she had been confident that she shouldn't have any issues taking 5 or 6 hits from Shifeng. She had recently obtained a bloodline, and her life rating was beyond that of an ordinary Tier 3 player, after all. Her basic attributes had also substantially increased. But now, she realized how sorely mistaken she had been. When Shifeng's attack had torn apart space itself, she realized that his strike had Tier 4 power. Combined with the attack's large AoE and high attack speed, she knew she didn't have a prayer of dodging or blocking the attack without an invulnerability skill or spell. Naturally, Blue Frost and his teammates were dazed after seeing the outcome of the exchange between Shifeng and Troubled Times. They didn't react like Zero Wing members at all. "Blue, is that really our guild leader?" A level 108, Tier 3 Guardian Knight prodded Blue Frost. When they heard the question, several other recent additions to the guild turned to their vice-guild leader with curious looks. Aside from Shelter 1's good development prospects, they had joined Zero Wing because of Blue Frost's individual strength. They didn't view Zero Wing's larger branches in the outside world as important. Many of the Dark Den's shelters had allied with powers from the outside world, too. Aside from financial support, Shelter 1 didn't receive any benefits from Zero Wing's main branch. Their connection was far weaker than the other shelters that had outside powers support. This was precisely the reason that they doubted the main branch's strength. After witnessing Shifeng's display, however, even a fool could tell that Zero Wing was no simple guild. With such a powerful guild leader, they were confident that Shelter 1 would eventually grow into one of the Dark Den's top 3 shelters. "He's our guild leader, Black Flame," Blue Frost muttered, replying to his teammate's question, but as he stared at Shifeng, he couldn't help but question his own memory. The power the swordsman had just used was too overwhelming. The man was nothing like the Shifeng he remembered. When Shelter 1's Zero Wing members heard the confirmation, their eyes lit with excitement. Before they could celebrate, however, Troubled Times pulled himself out of the crater around him, glaring at Shafong with a grim expression. If he hadn't blocked that attack with a Tier 3 taboo skill, he would have lost more than half of his HP. It seems that I've underestimated you, Frost. With such a guild leader to back you up, you're out of my reach, but don't think this one failure will be enough to stop the Sentinel Shelter's advance. Demon players will only grow stronger as time passes. Our next meeting will be the end of Shelter 1, Troubled Times said, sneering at Blue Frost. He then shouted to his teammates, "Everyone, retreat." Following their orders, every player from the Sentinel Shelter turned and fled. They gave Shafong and Fire Dance no opportunities to strike. When Blue Frost heard Troubled Times' warning, however, he paled. Meanwhile, the Extreme Light Shelter's members couldn't help but shake their heads and sigh. As Troubled Times had said, demon players and ordinary players were on different levels. Demon players could continue to upgrade their demon rank, bolstering their combat power as time passed. Shafong might be able to stop the Sentinel Shelter's demon players right now, but how long could he continue to do so? Moreover, Shafong was Zero Wing's guild leader. He couldn't stay in the dark den indefinitely. Once he left, Shelter 1, which constantly fought the Sentinel Shelter over resources, would suffer. You're not wrong, but that only holds true if you escape with your lives. Shafong growled, watching Troubled Times preparing to flee. Demon players could increase their combat power by raising their demon rank, but they had a fatal flaw. They couldn't afford to die. Once a demon player died, they'd lose a significant fraction of the strength and reputation they had built up. It was a problem that constantly plagued demon players. I admit that you're exceptionally powerful, Guild Leader Blackflame, but if we focus on escape, how many of us can you really kill? You're better off saving your energy. The moment Troubled Times finished his statement, he split into 5 clones of himself. All 5 clones then split up and fled in different directions. As he did, the rest of the Sentinel Shelter's Tier 3 experts used their trump cards as well, either boosting their movement speeds or creating a group of doppelgangers to cause confusion on the battlefield. It was obvious that the Sentinel Shelter's experts were quite adept at escaping and surviving. None of them were afraid of Shafong or Fire Dance's pursuit. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Is that so? Even as Troubled Times ran, Shafong showed no intention of chasing him down. Rather, he chuckled and asked, "What if we invite 2 Tier 3 magical classes to join the fray?" Suddenly, Troubled Times realized that something felt off. Magical classes were more suited for team battles than physical classes. They could exhibit far more combat power on the battlefield, which was why Graceful Monarch had gone out of her way to invite Blue Frost to the Extreme Light Shelter. Suddenly, space roughly 100 yards away from the battlefield began to blur. A translucent barrier of water then appeared, in front of which stood 2 women in elegant mage robes. All of the mana within 300 yards of the women gathered to them. The mana density around them became so high that it formed a thin layer of mist in the area. Is that a fully unlocked mana body? Chapter 25:15, Apex Sword. Chapter 25:15, Apex Sword. Seeing the mana on the battlefield gather around Aqua Rose and Violet Cloud, Troubled Times' expression darkened further. The mana body was the very symbol of Tier 3, and any player that reached Tier 3 understood one thing: they had no control over their mana bodies. They needed to learn about and adapt to their mana bodies first. Only then could they gain full control over their mana bodies and exhibit the true strength of a Tier 3 class. However, it wasn't easy to unlock a mana body's full potential. Very few Tier 3 experts had even begun. And yet, 2 experts with fully unlocked mana bodies had joined the fight, and both were magical class players. What? This can't be true, can it? They've already unlocked their mana body's full potential. What kind of guild is Zero Wing? Intense shock flashed in Graceful Monarch's and Purple Rakshasa's eyes as they stared at the distant Aqua Rose and Violet Cloud. Zero Wing was already amazing to have a monster like Shafong, but now, they learned that the guild had 2 magical class experts with fully unlocked mana bodies, as well. What was up with this? Even at this stage of the game, it was incredibly unlikely that the various superpowers would have a single expert with a fully unlocked mana body, yet Zero Wing had two. How did they do it? Even Illusory Words stared with wide, shocked eyes. She couldn't bring herself to believe what she was seeing. Since more of the various superpowers members had begun to reach Tier 3, these superpowers had shifted their focus toward helping their Tier 3 members unlock their mana body's potential, rather than nurturing more Tier 3 players. Controlling one's mana body wasn't like controlling the physical body, however. Players' mana control needed to be excellent to accomplish the task. Unlocking one's mana body required such high mana control that even magical class players, who often manipulated mana, only had a small edge over physical class players. Unlocking a mana body's potential was a gradual process. Players needed to conduct repeated experiments, slowly learning how their mana bodies operated. This process was impossible to skip since every player had a different mana body. The current top player in Crimson Emperor had only unlocked 35% of their mana body's potential, and the guild's remaining Tier 3 experts hadn't even unlocked 1%. As one unlocked more of their mana body, the process became more difficult. Based on Crimson Emperor's estimates, a Tier 3 player should need 2 or 3 months, at least, of relentless effort to unlock their mana body's full potential, notwithstanding any fortuitous encounters. And now, Illusory Words learned that Aqua Rose and Violet Cloud had both fully unlocked their mana bodies. How could she possibly believe this? Moreover, the mana the two women commanded was truly frightening. Despite standing several hundred yards away, Illusory Words could sense the torrent of mana flowing toward them. It felt like watching whales take a breath of air. Those two women were practically moving mana engines. Before anyone could recover from their daze, Aqua Rose and Violet Cloud had finished chanting the final verses of their incantations. As they did, a blue, twofold magic array appeared above the battlefield, covering a 100-yard radius. Meanwhile, several hundred silver magic arrays manifested around Violet Cloud. Tier 3 super spell, Frostburst Waterfall, Shadow Rage. With the help of their mana bodies, the women's spells drained all of the mana in a 400-yard radius. Suddenly, countless ice shards rained down from above, and as they passed, space froze. Any Tier 2 demonized player these ice shards encounter transformed into ice sculptures and died instantly. When the ice touched a Tier 3 demonized expert, they plundered 1/3 of their HP. While Aqua Rose's ice covered the battlefield, the Shadow Blade's Violet Cloud's Shadow Rage danced among the fleeing demon players. Not only had her mana body strengthened her Shadow Blades, but the fragmented legendary ranked Magic Light Pendant did so as well. 300 Shadow Blades, with power approaching the Tier 4 standard, struck the Sentinel Shelter's fleeing members. The blades were so powerful that not even Tier 3 experts could block them without taking some damage. The Tier 2 players didn't even have time to resist before they died. For a time, the several hundred fleeing players from the Sentinel Shelter transformed into ice sculptures or were shredded by the Shadow Blades. They all transformed into particles of light. Not even the running Tier 3 experts could escape death. Despite the world of ice and light the battlefield had become, none of the Extreme Light Shelter's spectating players found the scene beautiful. They only felt fear and dread as they gazed at the destruction. Everyone already knew that magical class players could exhibit far greater combat power on a battlefield than physical class players, but they couldn't help the shock they felt as they watched the two women destroy their enemies. Aqua Rose and Violet Cloud had only used a total of 2 spells, after all. Despite such a large-scale bombardment, not only hadn't the women's attacks harmed their allies, but they had also drastically reduced the number of players from the Sentinel Shelter. Only 4 seconds had passed since they had cast their spells, yet they had slain over 200 players. Moreover, the death toll climbed as more time passed. Not even a 100-man team of Tier 3 experts would prove this effective. Every player that had come from the Sentinel Shelter was a demonized player. Even their Tier 2 members had combat power nearly on par with the Tier 3 players after transforming into their demon form. Just landing a hit was a struggle for Tier 3 players, much less killing them. Moreover, demonized players possessed far higher HP, defense, and magic resistance than human players. At most, a Tier 3 skill or spell would deal high damage to these players. It would take a lot more to instant kill them. However, Aqua Rose and Violet Cloud spells had instant killed the Sentinel Shelter's Tier 2 players, giving the enemy healers no chance to help them. Moreover, the absurd damage the spells dealt wasn't the most frightening aspect about them. What truly amazed everyone was the fact that those spells seemed like they had a life of their own, always targeting players' blind spots. Only Refinement Realm experts and above had any chance of blocking them. Everyone else would have to bear the full brunt of the projectile's hits. Black Flame. Troubled Time's eyes bulged as he watched one subordinate after another fall. Every player he had brought with him was an expert from the Sentinel Shelter, and they all played crucial roles in the shelter. The Berserker skidded to a stop and pulled a gigantic, pitch-black crystal from his bag. Maddened, he shouted, "Since you won't let my people live, I'll take you down with us." With that statement hanging in the air, Troubled Times shattered the crystal. Suddenly, dark clouds formed above the plane, and a colossal spatial tear split the sky. A gigantic hand, as large as a mountain, then reached through the tear. Both Blue Frost's team and the players from the Extreme Light Shelter watched in horror. What? The Demon King's hand? How does he have that tool? Is Troubled Times insane? Does he want everyone to die? It's over. We're all dead. The players from the Extreme Light Shelter cursed Troubled Times for his cruelty. The Demon King's hand was every Dark Den player's nightmare. An independent player had once gotten their hands on this tool, and to avenge his fallen comrades, he had used the Demon God's hand to destroy the shelter responsible. The Demon King's hand had only attacked once, crushing the shelter into dust. The attack was a massive AoE. Although Troubled Times had summoned the Demon King's hand several hundred yards from the Extreme Light Shelter, it was still well within range. Even illusory words felt the presence of death surround her, not to mention the shelter's residents. Unfortunately, it was too late to run. The spell had already taken shape, and even space would freeze under a Tier 5 spell's influence. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. She couldn't even use instantaneous movement to flee. Even if she could, she wouldn't have time to escape the spell's AoE. Instantaneous movement would only teleport her several dozen yards away. The Demon King's hand? Even Shifeng's expression darkened when he saw the descending hand. He immediately activated disintegration power, forcing himself to Tier 4 before he leaped into the air, raising Killing Ray above his head with both hands. Block it. First Sword, Light Shadow. Chapter 2516, Legend of the Dark Den. Chapter 2516, Legend of the Dark Den. As Shifeng jumped into the air, the phantom of a gigantic greatsword encompassed his sacred sword. Shifeng swung the ghostly weapon at the descending Demon King's hand, stupefying the spectating players who had begun to despair. Is he really trying to block the Demon King's hand? Graceful Monarch was shocked as she watched Shifeng leap into the air. The Demon King's hand had Tier 5 power. Not even the Extreme Light Shelter's defensive magic array could stop that attack. At this stage of the game, this spell was unstoppable. It was why everyone had been overwhelmed with hopelessness the moment Troubled Times had used the Demon King's hand. Graceful Monarch had never expected Shifeng to confront the Demon King's hand instead of fleeing. The man was simply ludicrous. The only thing anyone could do was shake their head as they watched. No player could hope to block the Demon King's hand attack, players could only flee for their lives. The moment the Demon King's hand appeared, however, space within several thousand yards froze. Without a high-tiered magic scroll, which could break through frozen space, players could only rely on their own 2 feet to escape. Of course, trying to cross several thousand yards on foot in a few short seconds was a joke. So what if you can suppress the Sentinel Shelter? Against the Demon King's hand, you're nothing more than a pest. Troubled Times, shrouded in a black barrier, sneered as Shifeng tried to attack the colossal, pitch-black hand. You'll die alongside the Sentinel Shelter's people. The Demon King's hand was his greatest trump card. He hadn't wanted to use it, but he could just let Zero Wing get away with annihilating his team. There was only one way to stop the Demon King's hand. One would have to kill the user before they shattered the black crystal. Once the crystal shattered, not only would the energy within summon the Demon King's hand, but it would also surround the user in a protective barrier, keeping the user safe from the wrath of the Demon King's hand. By the time Troubled Times finished his statement, the Phantom Greatsword had collided with the descending, black hand. The Demon King's hand was the size of a mountain, and although the Phantom Greatsword was quite large, it was little more than a toothpick against the colossal palm. It was utterly insignificant. Boom! The instant the two attacks met, the sky shattered, and a massive spatial tear stretched for several hundred yards. The sound of an explosion echoed throughout the map, and the intense shockwave shoved back the players below, making the stumble. Once the shockwave had passed, the watching players looked up and realized that the gigantic hand had come to a grinding halt as if it had encountered an invisible wall. Suddenly, a figure shot down from the sky, crashing into the ground like a meteor with enough momentum that the impact created a crater that was several meters deep and over 24 meters wide. Everyone froze in shock. They only snapped out of their dazes after 4 seconds had passed. He did it. He actually blocked it. But that's the Demon King's hand. It's as powerful as a Tier 5 attack. Is he even human? The Extreme Light Shelter's players cried out in shock. For a moment, they even forgot to celebrate the fact that they had just survived the Demon King's hand attack. So, that is Zero Wing's guild leader. Astonishment flashed in Purple Rakshasa's eyes as she stared at the pitch-black hand as it gradually faded out of existence. Shifeng was simply too strong. She had met plenty of experts after leaving the Dark Den, but none were a match for Shifeng. His strength was beyond words. The Demon King's hand was every Dark Den player's nightmare. When facing the attack, players could only wait for death to claim them. There was nothing else they could do. And yet, Shifeng had just stopped the Demon King's hand. No one would believe her if she told them about this incident, but she had seen it with her own eyes. Is he really Black Flame? Illusory Words was just as flabbergasted. She could hardly believe what she had just witnessed. They were talking about a Tier 5 attack. Not even one of the outside world's guild cities would survive such an attack, much less a stronghold like the Extreme Light Shelter. If the Demon King's hand had been successful, nothing would have remained of the city's defensive magic array and walls. However, Shifeng had blocked the attack and saved them all. Only the 5 great super guild's true monsters were likely capable of accomplishing such a feat impossible. How can anybody block that thing? Troubled Times was dazed as he watched the Demon King's hand dissipate. His mind instinctively refused to accept the situation. A Tier 5 Demon King's attack could even vaporize Tier 4 players, much less Tier 3 experts. It shouldn't be possible for current players to block the attack. But no matter how hard the Berserker rubbed his eyes, he couldn't change the fact that the gigantic, pitch-black hand was fading away. It was obvious that the hand had exhausted the energy that had summoned it, and it couldn't sustain itself on this plane of existence. While everyone struggled with their shock and elation over the Demon King's hand's disappearance, a figure pulled itself from the massive crater in the middle of the battlefield. It was none other than Shifeng, who had intercepted the attack. He was clearly in a miserable state. Not only was he heavily injured, but he also had less than 10% of his HP remaining. The sacred sword in his hand trembled violently as if crying in agony. He's not dead. He survived. How high are his defense and HP? Everyone's jaw dropped when they noticed Shifeng emerge from the crater. The fact that the swordsman had stopped the Demon King's hand was already unbelievable, yet now, they learned that he had actually survived the endeavor. He had just taken on a Tier 5 attack, which was even powerful enough to severely injure Tier 4 mythic monsters if they took it head-on. Current players should have no hope of surviving such a blow. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Guild Leader. When Blue Frost and his comrades saw Shifeng, they were elated, and pride shone in their eyes. They had just witnessed a legend in the making, and their guild, Zero Wing, was responsible for it. Both Shifeng and Zero Wing would become legendary names throughout the Dark Den as word of this spread. Chapter 2517, Fame Spreads Across the Dark Den. Chapter 2517, Fame Spreads Across the Dark Den. Everyone was astounded that Shifeng had survived after countering the Demon King's hand, but the player in question only breathed a deep sigh of relief. Thank goodness the Demon King's hand's power is barely at Tier 5. If it had been stronger, not even Void Shield would have saved me. Glancing at his HP bar, Shifeng realized he had very nearly lost his life. Had an expert with a fully unlocked mana body summoned the Demon King's hand instead of Troubled Times, he wouldn't have even had a chance to resist. In God's domain, magic tools' effects varied depending on the state of a player's mana body. When a player with a locked mana body used a magic tool, its effects would be minimized, but if a player used their mana body's mana to activate a magic tool, they could elevate its power. If a Tier 5 expert had used the Demon King's hand, they would have likely boosted its power to the peak of Tier 5. Fortunately, Troubled Times hadn't unlocked his mana body's full potential yet. With his disintegration armor's help, Shifeng had forced himself to Tier 4, but his strength was nowhere near Tier 5, even after using Holy Annihilation's first sword. At best, his Light Shadow had peak Tier 4 power. To attack with Tier 5 strength, he'd have to master the second sword, Holy Devour. A large part of the reason for his miserable state was the fact that he hadn't yet perfected Light Shadow. Although, he still wouldn't have wielded Tier 5 power even if he had perfected the technique, pushing it to its limits. It only would have saved him from most of the damage he had suffered in countering the Demon King's hand. But that counterattack was his current limit. Even after forcing himself to Tier 4, executing Light Shadow perfectly was practically impossible. Mana techniques weren't like combat techniques, they focused on mana manipulation. With a combat technique, the stronger a player's physique was, the easier it would be to execute. In other words, higher-tiered players had an easier time using their combat techniques. However, the opposite was true for mana techniques. The higher-tiered a player was, they would have access to more mana to control, and as a result, controlling mana became more difficult as players reached higher tiers. Just using Light Shadow at Tier 4 had depleted more than half of his concentration. His consumption rate had been many times higher than when he used the technique at Tier 3. "Since you're done, Commander Troubled, it's my turn," Shifeng snapped, shifting his gaze to the dazed berserker a short distance away. Shifeng hadn't been loud, but when the Sentinel Shelter's survivors heard him, their scalps went numb as fear overcame them. Even Troubled Times' instincts screamed at him to run, and he took an involuntary step back for each step Shifeng took toward him. This swordsman was monstrously strong. The man had actually survived a hit from the Demon King's hand. Troubled Times couldn't even imagine what he could do against Shifeng. Although he knew that Shifeng was on his last leg after countering the Tier 5 attack, and he could probably kill the swordsman with a normal attack, he was afraid. He was even terrified of trying. No one could guarantee that Shifeng didn't have another trick up his sleeve. Moreover, demon players paid a much greater price than human players when they died, especially demon viscounts like Troubled Times. The crowd only gasped as they watched. He can still fight in such a state. Graceful Monarch's mind was blown when she sensed Shifeng's aura, which was growing stronger, not weaker. Even she was confident that she could easily defeat Shifeng in his current state, not to mention the demonized Troubled Times, but when she looked at the swordsman as he slowly approached Troubled Times, her instincts warned her to flee. "Black Flame, I surrender. But, don't you dare assume that Sentinel Shelter will just give up. It won't be long before our shelter takes Shelter 1 for our own," Troubled Times growled, mustering some courage. The berserker then pulled an ancient, silver magic scroll from his bag and activated it without hesitation. The spell immediately rent space before him. Rather than an endless void, however, players saw a burning forest within the tear. They also caught glimpses of a city enveloped in darkness among the burning trees. A boundary breaker scroll? Shifeng was slightly surprised to see the spatial tear. He had never thought Troubled Times would have such a precious scroll. The boundary breaker scroll was one of God's domain's super rare ancient magic scrolls. As long as one had a location's coordinates, they could teleport to that location from anywhere in the game, even from another world or continent. The scroll would even prove effective in frozen space. It was an invaluable tool that players could even use to flee from Tier 5 monsters. Players and powers in the past had even spent 5,000 gold on a single boundary breaker scroll, and even then, very few players had been willing to sell their scrolls. "Just you wait, Black Flame. The next time we meet, your Shelter 1 will fall," Troubled Times promised, sneering at Shifeng. He then jumped through the spatial tear, vanishing from the dark den. Every player from the Extreme Light Shelter and Blue Frost's team was stunned. None of them had expected Troubled Times to escape after his ruthless rambling. Moreover, he had fled without a second thought. Troubled Times was known for his courage in the dark den. If he had the slightest chance of victory, he'd continue to fight to the bitter end, and yet, was that really Troubled Times? His reaction wasn't unusual. If I were in his shoes, I would have fled from the guild leader as well. Not even a Demon King's hand could defeat Black Flame. What could Tier 3 players like us possibly do to him? Black Flame is amazing. With a guild leader like that, Zero Wing will never have to worry about its development. I wonder if Shelter 1's Zero Wing is still recruiting members? If it is, I'm definitely applying. After a brief moment of silence, a commotion erupted throughout the Extreme Light Shelter as everyone discussed Troubled Times' escape. They also expressed their admiration for Shifeng, and quite a few players, who had been developing in the shelter for some time, began to consider moving their bases to Shelter 1 and joining Zero Wing. Shifeng's presence was even more than enough to deter superpowers from attacking Shelter 1. Furthermore, Shifeng wasn't Zero Wing's only monstrously strong player. If they could learn from these monsters, they'd quickly grow stronger. He still got away in the end. Blue Frost frowned as he watched the spatial tier disappear. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Although he was surprised with how decisively Troubled Times had fled, the man's actions had been well within reason. Shifeng's strength had just been that astonishing. There was nothing surprising about how much Troubled Times feared Shifeng, going so far as to run, even knowing that Shifeng had almost no combat power remaining. While almost everyone viewed Troubled Times' ruthless promise as nothing more than an attempt to salvage his reputation, Blue Frost knew that he hadn't been joking. The Dark Den offered demon players an unimaginably advantageous environment, and now that Troubled Times had seen the depths of Zero Wing's strength, he would be absolutely confident of overcoming the guild the next time he attacked. Moreover, the fact that the Berserker had used one precious tool after another proved that a great power supported the Sentinel Shelter. If they didn't deal with this properly, Shelter 1 would face true danger. Escape? Do you think you can flee from me so easily? Shifeng chuckled as he watched the spatial tier finally close. Chapter 2518. Kill no matter the distance. Chapter 2518. Kill no matter the distance. Have you locked onto him, Fire? Shifeng asked, turning toward Fire Dance a short distance away. Players had many ways of escaping to live another day in God's domain, and when one wanted to hunt a fleeing player, they could rely on tracking scrolls, skills, and spells. Of all of the main classes, the assassin was the most adept at tracking and taking out targets. Once an assassin reached Tier 3 and unlocked their mana body's full potential, their tracking abilities would undergo a qualitative transformation. They could use their own mana to lock on to another player's mana signature. Unlike tracking scrolls, this method didn't add any debuffs to the target, making it nearly impossible to detect. Unless the targeted player could remove the mana the assassin had left on them, they couldn't shake off the tracker. Rest assured, guild leader, my mana is on him. Even if he runs to the edge of the world, I can find him, Fire Dance confirmed, nodding. She had locked on to every Sentinel Shelter member's mana signature even before she had killed the Tier 3 Shield Warner. Even if Aqua Rose and Violet Cloud hadn't taken action, none of the Sentinel Shelter players participating in the fight had had any chance of escaping with their lives. Guild leader, do you really intend to chase after Troubled Times? The Spatial Tear's destination is a city enveloped in darkness energy. There's a 90% chance that it is in demon players' territory. Those demon players are extremely biased against other races. Even if you manage to make it there, you'll have a hard time reaching Troubled Times, Blue Frost hurriedly interrupted, attempting to dissuade Shifeng from hunting down the Berserker in question. Although Troubled Times still posed a threat to Shelter 1, the Sentinel Shelter would need some time to recover from losing so many of its top experts. Meanwhile, Shelter 1 could use this chance to grow stronger. After today's battle, Zero Wing's fame would spread across the Dark Den, after all, and a large number of players would show up to join Shelter 1. The shelter wouldn't have to worry about its development speed. Once they upgraded Shelter 1 to a large shelter, troubled times would have a hard time threatening the shelter. Of course. These players have chosen to be one of Zero Wing's enemies, and I need to ensure that they know the price for doing so, Shifeng resolutely declared. Another time, he might have let the matter slide. But times had changed. As the Dark Den had more contact with the outside world, more superpowers would have designs on the other world. If superpowers wanted to develop in the Dark Den, they'd need a shelter first, but reaping the other world's benefits would take ages if they had to construct and grow a shelter from scratch. Hence, they would try to take over already developed shelters. Now that the Sentinel Shelter was the first power to target Shelter 1, he had to teach them a lesson and use them as an example, showing other powers that Zero Wing was not to be provoked. If he didn't act now, more powers would target his shelter in the future. I understand. I'll see to the necessary preparations, but now that the various powers are fighting over the bronze teleportation gates, traveling to the main continent is incredibly challenging. I'm afraid that we'll need some time before we can go after troubled times, Blue Frost said. Blue Frost understood what Shifeng intended when he heard the man's reply. It was clear that Shifeng wanted to make an example of troubled times, but traveling between the Dark Den and the main continent wasn't easy. Thus far, the bronze teleportation gates were the only reliable way to do so, but Shelter 1 wasn't a high enough rank to own such a gate. They would have to borrow a large shelter's bronze teleportation gate. Unfortunately, these gates' available slots were limited, and most had already been distributed. Traveling to the main continent any time soon wouldn't be a simple task. As soon as Blue Frost finished speaking, however, a crisp, pleasant voice interjected. Guild leader Black Flame, if you wish to visit the Demon City, I can help you with that. A horned eagle slowly descended from above, and the pleasant voice had come from none other than Illusory Words. You know where it is? Shifeng asked, surprise flashing in his eyes. He knew that demon players' territories were on the main continent, but they were akin to secret lands. Not only were they incredibly difficult to find, but their locations were also relatively unstable. Because of this, even the various superpowers had struggled to exterminate demon powers during his previous life. It would be more precise to say that I came from that city, Illusory Words said, smiling. If that's the case, what's your price? Shifeng asked. He doubted that Illusory Words would help him for free. The woman was one of Crimson Emperor's vice guild leaders, after all, and although their two guilds weren't enemies, they weren't friends, either. I don't need payment. Consider it Crimson Emperor's attempt to befriend Zero Wing, Illusory Words replied with a smile, shaking her head. All right. As long as Crimson Emperor doesn't provoke Zero Wing will avoid clashing with Crimson Emperor, Shifeng agreed with a nod. I'll have to thank you then, Guild Leader Black Flame. I will report this to my superiors later, Illusory Words said. She breathed a sigh of relief the moment Shifeng agreed to her proposition. Before you go there, however, I must warn you. Demon's Heart, an up-and-coming dark guild, rules over that demon city. The guild had been developing rapidly in the Ten Saints Empire. It's almost like it just appeared out of thin air. Even the super guild Battle Wolves has suffered heavy losses against Demon's Heart. Since Troubled Times has the city's coordinates, I assume that he has quite a close relationship with the Dark Guild. That demon city happens to be Demon's Heart's main headquarters. Demons control the entire map, in fact. The demonic residents target and attack any non-demon player they find. You should avoid exploring too much of the map if you wish to slay Troubled Times. While Illusory Words had explained the situation, Blue Frost, who had initially approved of the hunt, revealed a grim expression. They might not have had an issue if Troubled Times' relationship with Demon's Heart had been only on the surface, but it'd be a different story if he were close with the Dark Guild. Even super guilds had a headache when it came to Demon's Heart. If Troubled Times hid within the Dark Guild's headquarters, trying to hunt him down would be suicidal. Demon's Heart. So, that's why he was so confident. Realization dawned on Shifeng. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Demon's Heart had been one of the 6 great dark guilds in God's domain during his past. The entire guild consisted of demon players, and although it didn't have as many players as other superpowers, every member had extraordinary combat power. Ordinary players had had no chance against them. Many super guilds had suffered huge losses at the hands of Demon's Heart back then. The Dark Guild had even slain several super guilds' guild leaders. It was practically as powerful as the 5 great super guilds. As far as Shifeng could remember, Demon's Heart had begun to grow stronger around this time during his previous life, too. If Troubled Times thinks he can take Zero Wing on just because he's got a powerful backer, he is sorely mistaken. When Shifeng recalled Troubled Times's bold exit, he sneered. He turned to Illusory Words, asking, "Vice Guild Leader Illusory, how many people can you help me transport to the main continent? I don't have many slots available. May I know how many people you wish to take with you, Guild Leader Black Flame? If I don't have enough, I can borrow some slots from other guilds," Illusory Words offered after giving the matter some thought. A little over 300. Chapter 2519, Descending Toward Demon Territory over 300. Chapter 2519, Descending Toward Demon Territory over 300. Illusory Words could not help but be stunned when she heard how many players Shifeng planned to take with him. As far as she was concerned, Shifeng would be lucky to take 20 experts with him. They were talking about infiltrating demon territory, after all. Not only did powerful monsters wander the map, but there were also many powerful demons and demon players in the area. Human players wouldn't make it to the map without Demon's Heart's permission. Even Tier 3 experts would have a hard time surviving in the map. Once a human player was discovered, they'd be persecuted by an endless number of demon players. Meanwhile, one would have to be stealthy and wait for the opportune moment to strike if they wanted to slay a specific player in the map. Shifeng, however, wanted to take over 300 players with him on his hunt for Troubled Times. Evading detection in demon territory would be nearly impossible with such a large group. "Are you not capable of transporting so many people?" Shifeng asked when he noticed Illusory Words' astonished expression. Since he was heading back to the main continent, Shifeng couldn't leave the Hell Legion stuck in the Dark Den. Moreover, he wanted to make an example of Troubled Times. If he killed the Berserker off in secret, the man's death wouldn't become the deterrent he wanted. He needed the kill to have enough fanfare that it would prevent other powers from targeting Shelter One in the future. Although demon territories were akin to forbidden lands for ordinary expert teams, his was no ordinary team. It was Netherworld Empire's, one of the 5 great super guilds in God's domain, strongest trump card legion. The very idea that the Hell Legion couldn't move throughout demon territory was a joke. "It's possible, but I'll need some time. Would you be willing to wait a while, Guild Leader Black Flame?" Illusory Words asked after snapping out of her daze. "How long will you need?" Shifeng asked. "I should be able to arrange it within roughly 6 hours, Illusory Words confidently replied. "All right. I'll have to trouble you then, Vice Guild Leader Illusory." Shifeng breathed a sigh of relief when Illusory Words said she'd only need 6 hours or so. Fire Dance had used her mana to lock onto Troubled Times, but the technique wouldn't last long. At most, her mana would remain on her target for 2 days. After that, her mana would leave Troubled Times, and hunting him down would be almost impossible. Once Illusory Words and Shifeng had finished their discussion, the Vice Guild leader left the extreme light shelter atop her flying mount to see to the necessary preparations. Meanwhile, Shifeng led Blue Frost and the others into the shelter to rest while he waited for Illusory Words to contact him. While they rested in the extreme light shelter, news of Zero Wing's battle with the Sentinel shelter spread like wildfire. For a while, all of the Dark Den was in an uproar over the event. No one had ever thought a player could counter a demon god's hand and scare the Sentinel shelter's strongest expert, Troubled Times, away. While this news spread, word of Shifeng's hunt for Troubled Times shook the Dark Den's various shelters. It was a hot topic among countless players in the otherworld. What? Zero Wing is going to hunt down Troubled Times? How ruthless. But I like it. If Zero Wing succeeds, the Sentinel shelter is as good as finish. That shouldn't be possible. Troubled Times is no fool. Once he discovers a marker on him, he'll just wait in the city until it disappears. Zero Wing won't be able to reach him. That's why the guild is taking over 300 players on the hunt. I bet that Zero Wing won't hesitate to kill him even in a city. Troubled Times is pitiful. With so many experts going after him at the same time, he has no chance of surviving. I don't think Troubled Times will lose everything. I'm sure he'll take all of those experts with him to the grave. It really makes you wonder what Zero Wing is thinking by pulling such a crazy stunt. Zero Wing's generosity equally shocked and confused the Dark Den's players. They had never thought that Zero Wing was ruthless enough to gamble the lives of 300+ experts just to take out a defeated general. Even if Zero Wing succeeded, the guild would suffer massive losses. Lava Valley, Demon City, several middle-aged men, one of which was none other than Troubled Times, the commander of the Sentinel Shelter's #1 adventurer team, sat around a table in one of Demon City's high-class bars. Commander Troubled, the Zero Wing you spoke of is insane. The guild actually plans to come here just to deal with you. It's just 300+ experts. If they dare come to this city with so few players, they'll be wiped out before they even reach the city gates. I know, right? We're in demon territory. Zero Wing's experts won't even get past the several large adventurer teams in the surrounding area. Even if they're lucky enough to make it here, Demon's Heart controls this city. Even dragons would have to lay low here. When the middle-aged men around Troubled Times heard this, they all laughed. The Sentinel Shelter was no match for Zero Wing in the Dark Den, but it would be a different story in Demon City. Even if Zero Wing's 300+ experts magically appeared in the city, they couldn't touch Troubled Times. Attacking a player in Demon City meant declaring war against Demon's Heart. Right, Elder Heart, when will Vice Guild Leader Light return? Troubled Times asked a level 108, Tier 3 Elementalist. Does he need anything of me? The Vice Guild Leader is currently meeting with an important person, so he told us to rest for now. He's already commissioned the city's large adventurer teams to deal with the Zero Wing issue, rest assured. I doubt you'll even get to see Zero Wing's experts by the time this has been settled, the elementalist named Furious Heart replied, smiling. The city's large adventurer teams are getting involved. The news allowed Troubled Times to breathe a sigh of relief. Demon City's large adventurer teams wouldn't be able to harm Shafong in the outside world. At best, they might take out Zero Wing's other experts, but in demon territory, non-demon players were severely suppressed. They wouldn't be able to use their berserk skills. In other words, the terrifying berserk skill Shafong had used in the Dark Den wouldn't be available to him. Shafong would have to face a large number of demon players and a few that had basic attributes on par with or greater than Troubled Times. While Troubled Times chatted with Demon's Heart's elders, a 5-meter-tall, space-time gate appeared in a volcanic region within the Lava Valley's outer area. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Numerous figures burst forth from the gate, and leading the group was none other than Shafong. I'm finally back. Shafong gave a rueful sigh when he felt the familiar mana around him. Sure enough, one can only fully exhibit their full strength in a familiar environment. He couldn't help but feel a little uncomfortable both on the mana-deficient Western continent and in the mana-rich Dark Den. The instant he returned to his own continent, however, he felt his mana affinity improve. Everyone's through, Guild Leader. What should we do next? Blue Frost asked Shafong. He felt a little nervous around the Hell Legion's members, who had concealed their appearances under black cloaks. Good. Since everyone's here, it's time we pay Demon City a visit, Shafong declared with a grin. He then had Fire Dance lead the way toward Troubled Times. Chapter 2520, A Group of Monsters. Chapter 2520, A Group of Monsters. The moment Shafong gave the command, the Hell Legion began to move into formation. Once everyone was ready, they boldly marched toward the nearby forest. Illusory Words and her teammates, who had just emerged from the spacetime gate, were stunned at the sight. What do you think is going through Black Flame's mind, Vice Guild Leader? A Tier 3 male assassin from Crimson Emperor asked when he saw that the Hell Legion had no intention of hiding their movements. The Burning Forest is a main area for demon players, and he decided to go straight through it, rather than around. At this rate, it won't be long before demon players discover his team, and without an invitation from Demon City, every demon player they come across will attack, the burning forest served as a natural barrier around Demon City. Not only were all of the forest's monsters above level 100, but almost every level 100 plus demon player in Lava Valley grinded in the burning forest. Demon players had incredible innate perception. They often noticed normal players long before normal players noticed them. In addition, demon players could earn demon reputation to increase their demon rank by slaying non-demon players of equal or higher levels. This was why demon players were so eager to target non-demon players. Moreover, non-demon players were invaders when in demon territories, and demon players would gain far greater rewards for killing them. Even the 10 Saints Empire's various superpowers didn't dare set foot in the Lava Valley's burning forest without a proper invitation. Demon players would avoid conflict with guests of Demon City. Attacking one of the city's guests was akin to declaring war against the city's various powers. Doing that would be disastrous for any demon player developing in Demon City. Of course, Shifeng and his team hadn't received an invitation, and by marching into the forest, they were offering themselves up on a silver platter. It'd be a miracle if they even left the burning forest alive, not to mention reach Demon City. In general, over 100,000 players operated in level 100 maps, and the burning forest was the only level 100 map near Demon City. Far more players would be grinding in the area than in other level 100 maps. I don't know what he's thinking, but I know that the players with him are extraordinarily strong. They may have hidden their statistics and auras with black cloaks, but I can feel that they're all bona fide tier 3 players, Illusory Words said, a hint of fear flashing in her eyes as she watched the Hell Legion march into the forest. In total, Shifeng's group had over 300 tier 3 experts. Not even Crimson Emperor had so many at this stage of the game. Zero Wing has that many tier 3 experts. The male assassin's jaw dropped. Only super guilds had such a large number of tier 3 experts at this point. How could Zero Wing, a guild that had only established itself in God's domain and had no backing whatsoever, have as many tier 3 experts as a super guild? While Illusory Words and the male assassin shared their shock over the number of tier 3 experts Zero Wing had just sent into the burning forest, a young man in white robes and surrounded by the power of darkness stepped through the space-time gate, sneering when he overheard the two players' conversation. The fact that Zero Wing has over 300 tier 3 experts is indeed surprising. Unfortunately, that force isn't nearly enough to get through the burning forest, the young man said, realizing that Shifeng's group had already disappeared into the woods. This is just a repeat of Battle Wolves' attempt to invade Demon City. Not only had Battle Wolves dispatched over 300 tier 3 experts, but it had also sent an army of over 100,000 tier 2 experts. In the end, Battle Wolves' army had been annihilated before it had reached the city. I've also heard that Demon's Heart has hired the city's large adventurer teams to stop Zero Wing's force. Those adventurer teams don't have a lot of members, but every one of them is strong enough to deter superpowers. If they work together, Zero Wing won't stand a chance. Neither the male assassin nor Illusory Words tried to argue with the white-clad youth. He had only spoken the truth. In fact, the boy's evaluation of Demon City's large adventurer teams was a little humble. Battle Wolves' army had suffered tremendous losses against those large adventurer teams, and they had undoubtedly grown stronger since slaughtering the guild's members. As the white-clad youth and Illusory Words quietly discussed the situation, a party of demon players had discovered Shifeng's team. Why have so many human players come to the burning forest? Are they the bounty targets Demon's Heart announced? And here I thought Demon's Heart was joking. I hadn't actually thought that these human players would dare enter our territory. Quick! Send word to the large adventurer teams. If we take too long to report this, someone else will and claim the reward. The demon party's members were ecstatic over discovering Shifeng's group. They immediately reported their discovery to the large adventurer teams within the forest. Just as they were about to contact one of the adventurer teams, however, over 100 figures descended from above, landing a short distance from Shifeng's team. They all wore jet black plate armor and wielded standard weapons. They also radiated dense power of darkness and emitted an intense pressure that even deterred tier 3 experts from approaching. Crap! How is our luck so bad? I didn't know there was a demon patrol squad nearby. I guess we won't get credit for the discovery, after all, When the demon party members saw the figures in black, they could not help but shake their heads and sigh dejectedly. The burning forest was demon territory, and demon squads patrolled the area. Every one of these squads consisted of up to 3 Tier 4 Great Demons and 100 Tier 3 Advanced Demons. They also maintained a 10-level gap above Demon City's mainstream players. They weren't a force players should take lightly. These demon patrol squads were a large part of the reason that the Battle Wolves crusade on Demon City had failed before it had even reached the city gates. Now that one of these squads had discovered Shifeng's team, annihilation was almost certain. Furthermore, these demons had wings and were capable of flight. Even if Shifeng's group could fly, they wouldn't escape. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The watching demon players expected Shifeng's group to turn and flee, but they didn't. Rather, they took the initiative to charge at the demon patrol squad as if they had just found their prey. The Guardian Knight leading the charge bashed his shield into one of the level 115, Tier 4 Great Demons, which subsequently lost its balance and stumbled half a step back. That Guardian Knight's strength was unbelievable. A 3-meter-tall man and his emaciated companion proceeded to pin down the other 2 Tier 4 Great Demons. The Tier 3 Advanced Demons wanted to help, but other members of Shifeng's team got in their way. Shifeng's team suppressed the Demon Patrol Squad, which normally had an overwhelming advantage over players. The demons struggled against the players attacking them, unable to cooperate while their HPs visibly plummeted. In less than 30 minutes, the entire Demon Patrol Squad had been eliminated. Not a single demon had escaped with its life. Chapter 25-21, Turmoil in the Burning Forest. Chapter 25-21, Turmoil in the Burning Forest. As they watched the Demon Patrol Squad become nothing more than EXP for Shifeng's team, the demon players gaped in shock. Who are those people? The spectating demon players in the distance were both shocked and curious as they watched Shifeng's team. The demon patrol squads formed a solid defensive barrier that prevented intruders from reaching Demon City. They were akin to NPC City's soldiers. Not only did they have an arsenal of powerful skills and spells, but they could also fight as a team. They were nothing like ordinary demon players. However, these demons were little more than ordinary monsters before Shifeng. Are we still going to wait for the adventurer teams, leader, a level 105, Tier 2 ranger asked, turning toward the Tier 3 assassin that led their party. Not even Demon City's large adventurer teams would have an easy time against a team that could annihilate a demon patrol squad so effortlessly. Otherwise, those adventurer teams wouldn't share much of their spoils with an ordinary party. Moreover, they'd have to risk their lives to keep an eye on Shifeng's team until the adventurer teams arrived. They were demon players and had far sharper senses than human players, but there was no guarantee that they wouldn't be discovered. On the off chance that Shifeng's team noticed them, the consequences would be dire. The risk simply wasn't worth the reward. Of course, Demon's Heart is offering extraordinary rewards. Even if we help kill one player and earn only 10% of the rewards, we'll still get a demon crystal. Once we have 120 demon crystals, we can challenge a noble in the city. It would take ages to collect that many if we just try to grind for them ourselves, the Tier 3 assassin said. We will have to be careful and maintain some distance from those players, of course. We don't need to follow them closely, we can just follow their tracks. Silently, the rest of the party nodded in agreement. They all thought that their party leader's plan was viable. With their superior senses, they could avoid detection, even if Shifeng's team were powerful, as long as they kept their distance. As soon as the Tier 3 assassin finished speaking, however, the cold blade of a dagger burst through his chest. A critical damage of over -900,000 then appeared above his head. Before the Tier 3 assassin could speak, a snowy white blade slit his throat, devouring the last of his HP leader. The party's remaining 5 Tier 2 members were flabbergasted. What had just happened? A second ago, their party leader had been alive and kicking, and in the next, he was dead. Their party leader was a Tier 3 assassin, and even in Demon City, he was quite the famous expert, yet he had just died so suddenly. As their leader dropped to the ground. An assassin? Crap. We've been discovered. Run. By the time the 5 demon players reacted, The alluring woman vanished like a ghost. She reappeared before the 5 demon players, and a streak of snowy white light immediately swiped at them. A series of damages exceeding 1 million appeared above each demon player's head, robbing them of all of their HPs. How foolish. You radiate so much mana that you're practically walking lanterns in the dark. You dare follow us with such skills? Fire Dance shook her head disdainfully at the demon players' confused looks. She thought they had severely underestimated her. What Fire Dance didn't know is that in this era, when Tier 3 players were still extremely rare, everyone busily researched how they could best use their Tier 3 skills and spells. No one had time to spare on improving their mana control. Guild leader, I've taken care of the nearby demon players, Fire Dance reported to Chiffon after ensuring that she didn't detect any hostile players' mana signatures nearby. Good. Continue patrolling the area. If you run into too many demon players, call the Hell Legion's assassins for help, Chiffon said, nodding. He then returned his gaze toward the loot the demon patrol squad had dropped. He hadn't expected the squads to drop anything good. They were on par with NPC City's soldiers, after all. NPC soldiers didn't drop anything noteworthy even when players killed them. Contrary to his expectations, however, the demons had dropped considerably valuable loot. The weapons and equipment were subpar, all level 110 plus standard secret silver and fine gold equipment, but the demons had dropped dark magic gold. Dark magic gold was an exceptionally rare epic material. Not only could one use it to increase their success rate when crafting weapons and equipment, but there was also a chance of imbuing the resulting items with power of darkness. It was a material all master forgers sought. He had obtained 14 ingots of dark magic gold after slaying 1 demon patrol squad. If the master forgers of his previous life found out about this, they'd likely hunt the Burning Forest's patrol squads into extinction. However, the Hell Legion's members were even more ecstatic than Chiffon. The demons they had killed had awarded an abundance of EXP, and during the battle, they had gained a lot of insight into mana control. Although the demons' mana control couldn't compare to actual NPCs, it was far better than dumb monsters. They usually only fought dumb monsters, they had almost no chances of battling NPCs. Why wouldn't they be excited to pit their skills against demons that were as intelligent as true NPCs? Initially, the Hell Legion hadn't been particularly eager to attack Demon City, but this discovery had lit an enthusiastic fire in their hearts. While exploring the Burning Forest, the Hell Legion made no attempts to avoid demon patrol squads. Instead, they actively started to search for them. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the Burning Forest, a 1,000-man team assaulted a monster nest under the protection of a level 110 mythic boss. Although the team only had 1,000 players, over 80 of them had already reached Tier 3. Not even first-rate guilds could field such a team at this stage of the game. The several players leading the team easily suppressed the mythic boss, allowing the rest of the team to deal with the Great Lords and Grand Lords. Excellent. The monsters that ran ahead have been taken care of. All Tier 3s, attack the boss, a valiant, level 108 man in black robes and wielding a golden staff shouted as he fought the mythic boss. The 80-plus Tier 3 experts suddenly turned away from their targets, shifting their attention to the nest's boss. In less than 6 minutes, the mythic boss, which nearly everyone feared at this stage of the game, collapsed, dropping a pile of loot around its corpse. Although the independent teams watching from afar were tempted by the large number of items the mythic boss had dropped, none of them dared to steal the loot. The adventurer team raiding the monster nest was one of Demon City's large adventurer teams. The small organization was only inferior to the city's 2 guilds. Anyone that tried to steal from that adventurer team shouldn't dream of surviving in Demon City for long. Commander, Black Blind Man just sent a message stating that his party has discovered Demon's Heart's targets. A level 107, Tier 3 assassin quietly reported to the valiant man leading the team. They're already here? The valiant man grinned. Notify everyone. We'll head that way immediately. Black Blind Man is a cunning bastard. There's no way he stopped after notifying our team. If we take too long, there won't be anything left. Black Blind Man also warned that these players are incredibly strong. They actually had the upper hand over a demon patrol squad, the Tier 3 assassin said. They overpowered a patrol squad? I suppose they must be powerful. It's no wonder why Demon's Heart has offered such an excellent bounty, the valiant man said, nodding. Where are the targets now? He was very familiar with the Demon Patrol Squad's strength. No ordinary 100-man Tier 3 team could take them on. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. I don't know, the Tier 3 assassin awkwardly replied. Didn't Black Blind Man follow them? The valiant man asked curiously. He was also very familiar with the player known as Black Blind Man. Not only was the man powerful individually, but he was also one of the top-ranked assassins in Demon City. There was no way Black Blind Man would forego an opportunity like this. He's dead. Chapter 25-22, Great Disturbance. Chapter 25-22, Great Disturbance. Blindman's dead? The valiant man, Regretful Wind, was astonished by the report. Someone actually noticed him and killed him, with his cautious nature and tracking skills. Black Blind Man was a relatively well-known assassin in Demon City, and his sharp senses were particularly outstanding. When Demon City's large adventurer teams, including Windtooth, targeted a specific player, they often hired Black Blind Man to track the player down. Regretful Wind had never heard of Black Blind Man running into issues when tracking a target. According to Blindman's teammates, his grinding party had been annihilated without any time to fight back. In a fit of rage, Blind Man logged off and contacted his close friends to notify everyone in the city. He wants Demon City's players to ambush the people who killed him, the Tier 3 assassin said, nodding. Unfortunately, his message is over 10 minutes old, and we don't have any new details about the invaders' whereabouts. Since those players can defeat a Demon Patrol squad, they must be fairly strong. I guess it isn't surprising to hear that they've killed Blind Man, but we have to hurry. Now that Blind Man has informed the public of the situation, many of the city's players will prepare for battle, Regretful Wind said, frowning. He wouldn't have much of an issue if Black Blind Man had simply informed the city's large adventurer teams. Only a small fraction of Demon City's player population consisted of large adventurer team members. Even if the adventurer teams mobilized all of their members, locating the intruders in the burning forest wouldn't be easy. If everyone in the city knew about them, however, locating the intruders would be a piece of cake, and the Windtooth adventurer team would have a lot more competition. Demon's Heart had offered an extraordinary bounty for these players' heads, with each intruder worth 10 demon crystals. Players could slay the monsters in demon territory for demon crystals, but the drop rate was incredibly low. Players could only increase their chances by hunting powerful monsters. Even the city's various large adventurer teams would be lucky to collect 10 or 20 demon crystals per day. Once players collected 20 demon crystals, they could apply for the challenge to earn a noble rank in the city. If they completed the challenge, they'd become one of Demon City's nobles and gain a significant boost to their strength. Even those with noble demon ranks had to acquire demon crystals to elevate their strength and position, although they would need even more demon crystals to do so. With the opportunity to earn 10 demon crystals per player killed before them, none of Demon City's residents would simply stand by and watch. Rest assured, Commander. I've already instructed our team to search the burning forest. It won't be long before we find the invaders. While I was grinding earlier, I also found a secret silver treasure chest and obtained an exotic perception potion. The potion can improve a player's senses and tracking abilities for 6 hours. Normally, players' tracks fade after an hour, but with this potion, I can even follow 4-hour-old tracks. If we make our way to Blindman's last known location, we should easily be able to locate these players, the Tier 3 assassin said, smiling. Even with the rest of Demon City's players after then, ordinary teams will be helpless against players this strong. We have more than enough time to claim the bounty. Good. We'll set off immediately. Once we locate our targets, you'll receive 10% of the bounty for your contributions. Also, instruct our brothers and sisters in the city to bring the trump cards we've kept hidden, Regretful Wind declared. Aren't you giving these newcomers a little too much credit, Commander? We've already stopped the Battle Wolves invasion. How strong could a bunch of nobodies from the Dark Den possibly be? The Tier 3 assassin asked disdainfully. The Dark Den was merely a small otherworld, with a pitifully low number of players. The otherworld's total player population didn't even come close to half of the players in an ordinary kingdom. The only advantages the Dark Den had were its impressive leveling environment and abundance of skill and spell books. There was no way such a small world could produce experts as powerful as those in Demon City. I know, but each of them is worth 10 demon crystals. Letting a single player escape would be a waste, and I doubt that Demon's Heart will be so generous in the future, Regretful Wind said. Regretful Wind had never once been wary of the invaders. Battle Wolves had tried to invade Demon City with over 100,000 experts, yet the Super Guild's army had been obliterated before it had even reached the city. If not even Battle Wolves could make it through the burning forest, what could a few hundred invaders accomplish? What Regretful Wind truly minded was the demon crystals Demon's Heart had offered. I understand. I'll notify our members in the city right away. The Tier 3 assassin then did as he promised. Meanwhile, a great disturbance had rocked Demon City. This is our chance to get rich. 10 demon crystals per person. We won't let anyone get in our adventurer team's way. The intruders have already appeared in the burning forest's outer region. Inform out nearby members immediately. We must find them before other teams do. Invader hunting team recruiting. Anyone who wants to earn demon crystals should apply quickly. As Black Blindman's friends spread the word, everyone in Demon City was in a frenzy. Over 100,000 players rushed toward the burning forest like a bunch of madmen. When Troubled Times, who rested in one of the city's high-class bars, heard the news, his expression turned gloomy. He hadn't thought that Shafong would actually come here. There's no need to worry, Commander Troubled. Now that this matter has caused such a commotion, the large adventurer teams we've hired won't be the only ones on the hunt. Medium adventurer teams are also on the move. Even if every super guild in the Ten Saints Empire worked together, they'd never get past so many experts. A man in silver armor tried to reassure Troubled Times when he saw the man's concern. That's right. Even if Zero Wing somehow manages to make it to Demon City, Demon's Heart is still waiting for them. We stand by your side. Zero Wing's efforts will be for naught, Furious Heart said. He thought that Troubled Times was worried for nothing. You shouldn't underestimate Black Flame, Troubled Times said. Of course, if everyone here tries to stop him, I doubt he'll accomplish anything. Troubled Times had seen the strength of Demon's Heart's elders personally. They were all true monsters, particularly Furious Heart. The man was only half a step away from becoming a count in Demon City and was far stronger than Troubled Times, who had only recently become a demon viscount. Furthermore, demon players who had the viscount rank or higher received a strength boost while inside Demon City. While Demon City's players discussed Shafong and his invading team, several thousand Windtooth members arrived in the burning forest's outer region. Commander, I've found traces of their battle, and the tracks are still fresh. They should be nearby, the masked, Tier 3 assassin excitedly reported as he examined the lingering traces Shafong's team had left behind. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU good. Proceed according to plan, everyone, Regretful Wind commanded, instructing his team to prepare for battle. These players began to follow the Tier 3 assassin's lead while suppressing their auras to the best of their ability to avoid detection. As they followed Shafong's tracks, they encountered Demon Patrol Squad corpses. 100. 200. 300. By the time Windtooth's members had crossed 3,000 yards, they had found more than 1,000 demon corpses, and the freshest had been from a patrol squad with over 200 demons. Chapter 25-23, Run. Chapter 25-23, Run. Why are there so many fallen demon patrol squads? What happened here? Did those people kill all of these patrol squads? Windtooth's members were curious and afraid when they saw so many demon corpses strewn around them. The demon patrol squads served as a barrier between intruders and Demon City, with 10,000 demons patrolling the burning forest. Thus far, however, the adventurer team had found more than 1,000 demon corpses. This was 1/10 of the burning forest's defenses. Commander, there's something you need to see, the masked, Tier 3 assassin, who had scouted ahead, reported in the team chat. All of the team members put up their guard the moment they heard the assassin. Meanwhile, Regretful Wind hurried to the assassin's side. Finding his comrade, Regretful Wind arrived before a forested area laden with player corpses. To his surprise, however, there was no sign of battle. Some of the weapons and equipment the players had dropped hadn't been touched, and after a quick glance around, Regretful Wind counted more than 200 bodies. Based on how organized the corpses lay, it looked as if death had befallen them as the group marched through the forest. It was almost as if the battle had ended as abruptly as it had begun, and none of these players had had a chance to react to the attack. While scanning the dead, Regretful Wind quickly noticed the familiar faces of several Tier 3 experts. He clearly wasn't pleased about it, either. How was Misty Ghost's main force annihilated? Regretful Wind stared at the fallen team in confusion. What happened here? Misty Ghost was a relatively famous medium-scale adventurer team based in Demon City. Although the adventurer team had fewer than 2,000 members, it had over 30 Tier 3 experts, including 1 Demon Viscount and 10 Demon Barons. Even Windtooth would struggle to defeat Misty Ghost. And yet, Misty Ghost's main force had died here. They hadn't even had a chance to fight back. It was unbelievable. I don't see Misty Ghost's commander, 7 constellations, among the corpses, Commander, the Tier 3 assassin reported after carefully examining the bodies. He's not here. Regretful Wind took a closer look at the slain players, as well, and just as the masked assassin had said, 7 constellations wasn't present. He breathed a deep sigh of relief. 7 constellations was Misty Ghost's sole Demon Viscount and one of the top 10 assassins in the Demon City. Even Regretful Wind would have a hard time defeating the man. If 7 constellations had died as suddenly as his team, Regretful Wind's prey would be far stronger than he has surmised. I have found traces of a battle. It's possible that he and his surviving teammates were involved, the masked assassin said as he looked toward the towering trees some distance away. The trees were large enough that it would take several people to wrap their arms around the trunks, but they had been sliced cleanly through. Moreover, lingering life auras clung to the trees. The fight wasn't that long ago. Misty Ghost's members must have encountered the invaders. They might still be fighting as we speak, Regretful Wind guessed, staring at the bisected trees. Notify the team, we're going after them, and we won't bother hiding our presence. Understood. The masked assassin nodded before contacting the team. Windtooth's several thousand members charged past the cut trees, and they made no attempt to hide. It wasn't long before they encountered another group boldly marching through the forest. The group had more than 4,000 players, and Windtooth's members tensed when they saw them. I see you've picked up the scent, as well, Old Wind, the savage woman carrying 2 dark blue axes and leading the group said, smiling at Regretful Wind. This is interesting. Now, all of Demon City's top 3 adventurer teams are here. I suppose this is only the second time since the fight with Battle Wolves, a dignified, debonair man carrying an ancient bow spoke up. When they heard the 2 leaders, Windtooth's members released a held breath. These 2 were the commanders from Crimson Sand and Eternal Night, 2 of Demon City's top adventurer teams. They were also Regretful Wind's old acquaintances. Indeed. The last time we worked together, we helped Demon's Heart secure more territory, Regretful Wind said. Smiling, he continued, well, how are we going to split the profits this time? Regretful Wind was very familiar with the 2 players before him. Since they had found each other in the forest, Windtooth had lost its chance to monopolize the bounty rewards. But the encounter also eased the pressure on Regretful Wind's adventurer team. No force that could instantly wipe out Misty Ghost's main force should be underestimated. Even Windtooth would suffer tremendous losses if it tried to take on such a force alone. If his adventurer team worked with Crimson Sand and Eternal Night, however, the 3 teams could minimize their losses and maximize their profits. There's not much to consider. We'll split them evenly. I'm sure you find this acceptable, correct? Helpless Smile, the bow-carrying man who commanded Eternal Night, said. Flame Feather, Crimson Sand's commander, nodded in agreement. Deal. That way, we won't have to compete for contribution and can divide the work, Regretful Wind replied without hesitation. If their three adventurer teams tried to outdo each other, the fight would descend into chaos. Doing so would only weaken their teams. The gains weren't worth the losses. Rather, they'd all be better off cooperating, maximizing their combat power. None of the three teams even considered that they might be ripped off by another. Each of the teams was on par with the others, and they all had around 3 or 4 demon viscounts and 30 demon barons. They each also had around 70 or 80 tier 3 experts. Good. That settles it. When we find the rumored monster, I'll hold him back. Old Wind and Smile, back me up from the sides, Flame Feather said. Regretful Wind was the third-ranked elementalist in Demon City, and one of the publicly acknowledged top 10 experts in the city. Although Helpless Smile wasn't quite as powerful, he still ranked among the top 15 experts in Demon City. In a support role, he was one of the 5 best players in the city. No problem. Neither Regretful Wind nor Helpless Smile objected to Flame Feather's plan. She was the strongest melee player among their adventurer teams, after all. Flame Feather was also the only 3-star Viscount in any of their teams, only one step away from becoming a Count. Shortly after the 3 commanders came to an arrangement, they heard the sound of battle from the nearby forest. All 3 teams immediately charged toward the sound. After crossing about 500 yards, a loud explosion rocked the forest. Boom! A figure suddenly shot past the 3 adventurer teams like a cannonball, crashing into a large tree roughly 100 yards away from Regretful Wind. The tree shattered instantly, falling, while the figure slid down its trunk to the ground. To everyone's surprise, this figure radiated an even stronger aura than a Grand Lord of the same level. Even so, the figure rapidly lost HP 7 constellations. Regretful Wind paled when he recognized the player. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Flame Feather and Helpless Smile looked at the player with somber expressions, as well. They were all familiar with 7 constellations and the strength he wielded. Demon City didn't have many Viscounts, and as such, they all, more or less, knew each other. Despite his noble demon rank, however, 7 constellations had just been defeated. The man hadn't even had a chance to flee. They could only imagine how strong his opponent was. Mon, stir! Run, quickly! 7 constellations hissed between clenched teeth when he saw the nearby adventurer teams. Before he could finish his warning, however, his HP dropped to 0, and his body went as limp as a puppet with its strings cut. Chapter 25-24, She is the Monster. Chapter 25-24, She is the Monster. The 3 adventurer team's members were senseless when 7 constellations died. A monster, huh? Regretful Wind frowned, contemplating 7 constellations' dying words. Demon Viscounts stood at the apex of Demon City, and 7 constellations was an assassin, a class that boasted its survivability. And yet, he had just died. Moreover, 7 constellations had warned their 3 adventurer teams away. It was clear that in his mind, these 3 teams were no match for the monster he had just faced, even if they worked together. Although that was only the assassin's opinion, his words should be credible. If 7 constellations focused on getting away, not even the top-ranked experts in Demon City could stop him. But he had still fallen. It seems our opponent isn't as simple as we thought. What do you guys think? Regretful Wind asked the other 2 commanders. If they fought an opponent that even 7 constellations feared, the outcome wouldn't be as pleasant as they hoped. It's no wonder why Demon's Heart has offered such a gracious bounty, Helpless Smile replied, staring at the assassin's corpse. But this isn't the first time we've faced monstrous experts. Besides, if we flee, we'll become laughingstocks in Demon City by tomorrow. Although Helpless Smile felt the weight of 7 constellations' warning, it wasn't enough to order a retreat. Even if these intruders are powerful, there's no guarantee that we can't defeat them, Flame Feather agreed with a nod. Fighting spirit burned in her eyes as she launched into another charge. Don't forget, we have the home ground advantage. Our opponent may be a monster, but we'll still make him suffer. Monster-like experts were something to be feared. Ordinary Tier 3 experts had no hope against such players. However, their adventurer teams had fought monster-like experts before, particularly during the fight with Battle Wolves. Yet, these monstrous experts hadn't been powerful enough to save the guild from its miserable defeat in the burning forest. Furthermore, their adventurer teams had grown stronger since then. She was confident that they could hold their ground against monster-like experts and that they still had a chance at victory. The members of all three adventurer teams nodded in agreement with Flamefeather's sentiment. Achieving victory might be difficult if their teams fought alone, but they had all agreed to work together. Not even the 10 Saints Empire's superpowers would dare to take on their combined force, much less a measly team of 300 plus. It wasn't long after she finished speaking, however, that everyone noticed a lithe figure beside Seven Constellations' corpse. The figure silently looted the assassin's body as if she didn't have a care in the world. What amazing concealment techniques! Surprise flashed in Regretful Wind's eyes when he saw the woman who had abruptly appeared. As demon players, their perception of non-demon races' life signatures was incredibly powerful. Even an assassin in stealth would have a hard time hiding from demon players, especially with less than 100 yards between them. However, they couldn't seem to detect a trace of the female assassin's presence. The woman's mastery of concealment arts was unrivaled, even in Demon City. Is she the monster Seven Constellations warned us about? Helpless Smile's expression tensed as he watched the alluring woman a short distance away. If he encountered the assassin normally, she'd kill him 9 out of 10 times. He finally realized, more or less, why Seven Constellations had failed to escape. Interesting. I'm going to fight her, Flamefeather declared, her fighting spirit reaching its peak. She then activated demonification and charged at the female assassin, wielding her axes. As the only 3-star demon Viscount, activating her demonification would not only strengthen her physique by a large margin, but her basic attributes would also undergo a qualitative transformation. In her demon form, every action she took could transform the terrain around her. With just her Tier 2 demon charge, Flamefeather had bathed her surroundings in a sea of fire and shook space itself. Another ambush. Sensing Flamefeather charging toward her, Fire Dance stored the dagger she had just picked up from Seven Constellations' corpse and unsheathed the short sword hanging at her waist. In that case, I'll bury you alongside them. Fire Dance then swung 1,000 transformations through the empty air before her. Tier 3 skill, Triple Flash. 3 streaks of black light shot toward Flamefeather, one after another and as fast as lightning. However, Flamefeather's enhanced physique allowed her to brandish her axes during her charge in turn. Tier 3 skill, Demon Storm. Boom, boom, boom. A series of explosions echoed throughout the forest, and the powerful shockwaves knocked down trees while stirring dirt and debris into the air. Among the chaos, Flamefeather stumbled 3 steps back as a damage of over -50,000 appeared above her head. The difference between the two women's strengths was clear. What? Flamefeather was pushed back even in her demon form? The scene astonished Helpless Smile. He was perfectly aware of how powerful Flamefeather became after activating demonification. She was undoubtedly the strongest player among 3 adventurer teams. In her demon form, Flamefeather's Tier 3 skills were nearly as powerful as Tier 4 attacks, yet she had just lost a competition of strength against this human assassin. Amazing. It's no wonder why Seven Constellations called you a monster and assumed that we're no match for you, Flamefeather said, the flame of passion in her eyes burning even brighter than before. She launched into another charge, continuing, if I were alone, I wouldn't be a match for you, but in this forest, I'm not your only opponent. Regretful Wind finished activating his demonification as Flamefeather finished her statement, and he began to chant an incantation. When he completed it, he slammed the butt of his staff on the ground, and a golden, 2-fold magic array appeared under his feet. Tier 3 spell, Earthen Roar. Suddenly, the earth beneath Fire Dance's feet burst, exploding with countless streaks of light. Meanwhile, Helpless Smile didn't waste time. After activating demonification, he pulled the string of his ancient bow and launched 6 arrows into the sky, which formed a 6-point star above the assassin. Tier 3 skill, Demon Thorns. As the star-shaped magic array took form, pitch-black magic arrows descended, each with the power of a Grand Lord-ranked archaic species. Under Helpless Smile's control, a total of 18 magic arrows fell, diverting Fire Dance's attention away from Flamefeather. The nearby adventurer team members gaped, impressed by their commander's coordination. They had never guessed that those three would be so strong when they worked together. How was this still a battle between players? It was basically a fight between monsters. Not even Battle Wolves monster-level experts could stop their three commanders when they cooperated. With attacks coming in from all directions, Fire Dance was forced to activate a life-saving skill. She immediately used shadow steps to appear behind Flame Feather, evading the countless streaks of light. She dodged most of the 18 magic arrows, relying on Wind Step's brief invulnerability to block 5 unavoidable shots. She then tried to block the 2 incoming axes with 1,000 transformations. Boom! Fire Dance didn't have time to use a skill to block the axes, filled with power of darkness, in time, and as her short sword collided with Flame Feather's weapons, she was sent flying, losing 70,000 HP in the process. She didn't even have 1 million total HP, and the strike claimed a visible chunk. All hail the commanders. So what if she's a monster? She's still at a disadvantage against our commanders. The adventurer team members were ecstatic and overcome with pride to see one of their commanders dominate this monstrous assassin. The various superpowers monster-level experts were a nightmare for adventurer teams like theirs. Although their teams had defeated Battle Wolves' monstrous players, that had only been possible because of Demon's Heart's help. To be precise, their 3 adventurer teams had merely played a support role. However, their teams now had the strength to deal with monster-level experts, too. Now that she's alone, we can't let her escape. Flame Feather shouted to Regretful Wind and Helpless Smile. Fire Dance was clearly the invader's cornerstone, and since she was alone, this was the perfect chance to take her out. If they could not defeat her, and she regrouped with her allies, dealing with her would prove far more challenging. Relax. I've already had people set up a spatial barrier. She might be an assassin, but she won't get away that easily, Regretful Wind replied, grinning. After witnessing the initial clash between Flame Feather and Fire Dance, Regretful Wind realized the importance of this battle. Hence, he had instructed his subordinates to set up a magic barrier before he had even joined the fight. He wanted to ensure that they could flee if they were no match for the assassin, and if they were, that they'd have an easier time taking her down. Although they now had the upper hand, killing a monster like Fire Dance wouldn't be easy, but with the magic barrier up, they could buy enough time to complete the task. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Even as Regretful Words finished his statement, a gigantic barrier rose around the battlefield, covering a 200-yard radius. 88 magical class players powered the array, and not even a Tier 4 mythic monster would find it easy to break out of. Good. Now, she's dead. Flame Feather sighed with relief as the barrier took effect. A second after the magic barrier completed, however, an arc of blue lightning struck from a distance. Boom. Everyone heard the sound of glass shattering as the sturdy barrier disintegrated into particles of light. As the adventurer team's members looked around in confusion, a deep voice reached them from the distant forest. It seems you've taken good care of my companion, but since you're looking for a fight, let me join in. Chapter 25-25, True Monster. Chapter 25-25, True Monster. When the 3 adventurer teams heard the deep voice, their expressions betrayed their apprehension. The 3 commanders were particularly tense as they continued their fight against Fire Dance. There's more than one monster. Regretful Wind's expression hardened while he watched the magic barrier fade away. 88 magical class players had powered that barrier. It should even withstand quite a few attacks from a mythic monster. And yet, that barrier had just shattered after a single attack. Another monster-level expert among the invaders was the only possible explanation, and this newcomer definitely had the strength of mythic monsters. He should be even stronger than the female assassin they currently faced. A single team has 2 monsters. Who are these people? Helpless Smile growled, frowning. He had never expected the invaders to have more than one monster-level expert. The 3 of them were already having a rough time trying to suppress Fire Dance. If another expert of her caliber joined the fight, they'd be in trouble. So what if there's another monster? Why should we fear them? Resolutely, Flame Feather reminded her comrades, don't forget that we have over 5,000 players, including 7 more demon viscounts and nearly 100 demon barons. What is one extra monster compared to our forces? The only reason the 3 commanders had attacked was to gauge how much they had improved since the war with battle wolves. Furthermore, ordinary Tier 3 experts would only get in their way in such an intense battle. If they had to face 2 monsters, however, the members of their adventurer teams could keep the second one busy. Even if their teams couldn't kill the other monster, they could buy enough time for the commanders to finish off Fire Dance. Eventually, their adventurer teams would secure victory, even if some of their members died. That's right. However, it seems we'll incur some losses in this operation, Helpless Smile said, nodding. He then gestured to one of his subordinates in the distance and said, Blue, lead our main force members to stop the other monster. Try to buy as much time as possible. Understood, the Tier 3 shield warrior, Blue Sea, responded. Mandala, take your group and go with them. Flame Feather ordered a Tier 3 dark druid on her team. Poison, I'm giving you command of our members, Regretful Wind shouted to the masked assassin named Poison Heart. If worst comes to worst, use that. Just make sure that you keep the second monster away from us for now. Are you sure that I can use it? Poison Heart instantly grew excited upon receiving permission from his commander. I promise, he won't get anywhere near you. Overhearing the order, both Flame Feather and Helpless Smile glanced at Regretful Wind in astonishment. What? Old Wind, you were the one who bought that thing during the last intermediate auction? Flame Feather blurted. There was only one item she could think of that could easily deal with monster-level experts, and it was one of the items that had appeared in the last intermediate auction in Demon City's auction house. Satan's Remnant Soul. That item was a true treasure. It would allow a player to transform into a Tier 4 Great Demon for a short time. Players would also have access to all the skills and spells in a Tier 4 Great Demon's arsenal. Satan's Remnant Soul's only flaw was its short, 30-minute duration. Even so, every demon player in Demon City had gone crazy over the item. Aside from the strength boost, Satan's Remnant Soul granted players better control over Power of Darkness, albeit temporarily. This experience would be immensely helpful when players took the challenges to increase their demon ranks. Just having a Satan's Remnant Soul in one's bag was a major deterrent for the city's various major powers. No power or adventurer team wanted to incur the wrath of a Tier 4 Great Demon, after all. When the Satan's Remnant Soul had been put up for auction, Demon City's various major powers had bid for it like madmen. Moreover, the seller didn't accept coins, but demon crystals, which were the standard form of currency in Demon City's intermediate auctions. In the end, someone had purchased the Satan's Remnant Soul for an astronomical sum of 1,000 demon crystals, but the buyer hasn't revealed their identity. The mystery of who now owned the item had been a hot topic among the city's major powers. Even Helpless Smile flashed Regretful Wind a surprised look. He had never dreamed that Wind Tooth had hidden such a powerful trump card. If Eternal Night had clashed with Wind Tooth, the consequences would have been dire for his adventurer team. That being said, he had to admit that he was glad to work with Wind Tooth right now. MHM. I dug up practically everything we had to win it, Regretful Wind proudly confirmed. I had wanted to save it for a fight against a superior mythic, but I don't mind using it to annihilate these invaders. I will say this, however, any invader Poison Heart kills belongs to Wind Tooth. Since you're willing to go to such lengths, we won't take advantage of you. Don't worry, Helpless Smile agreed, nodding. That's right. We won't ask for any loot from an invader the Great Demon slays. I'd be even happier if the Great Demon takes care of the 2 monsters, Flamefeather said, laughing. She had been confident that the 3 of them could defeat Fire Dance eventually with the magic barrier to back them up, but now that the barrier had fallen, they wouldn't be able to stop the assassin if she focused on fleeing. This battle would go much smoother if Poison Heart could take care of the 2 monstrous invaders. In the fields, monster-level experts posed an extraordinary threat, especially if they had no qualms with hit-and-run tactics. They were an absolute nightmare to deal with. That's reassuring, Regretful Wind said. He then turned toward Poison Heart and said, since the 2 commanders have agreed, use it, Poison. The Satan's Remnant Soul was precious, and there was almost no chance that another would go up for auction, but obtaining the monster-level experts' weapons and equipment would make it a worthwhile transaction. The superb quality of their weapons and equipment was a large part of the reason that monster-level experts were so much stronger than peak experts. He could likely earn back the cost of using the Satan's remnant soul with just one of their weapons or equipment pieces, possibly even more. Poison Heart was elated as he pulled a black bottle from his bag and started to remove the seal. He had hoped he could use the Satan's remnant soul to help him become a 2-star Viscount, but because the item was so valuable, he didn't want to use it solely for his promotion. He had wanted to save it until he could use it to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, which was why the item had remained in his bag for so long. Now that he had found the perfect opportunity, he wouldn't hold back. Once Poison Heart had removed the seal, he doubled in size, and 2 pairs of jet black wings, enveloped in fire, grew from his back. So strong. So, this is the power of a Tier 4 Great Demon, Poison Heart exclaimed as he felt an immense power course through his veins. So much strength. Absolute power. This omnipotent feeling was intoxicating. Sure enough, a great demon is truly awe-inspiring. Poison can now likely slay all of the intruders without our help. Helpless Smile said. He couldn't help but feel a little jealous as he gazed at Poison Heart's new form and sensed the assassin's intense aura. Poison, I'll leave the rest to you. Remember, you need to finish this battle quickly. We won't be able to hold on for long, Regretful Wind shouted to his subordinate before casting another spell against Fire Dance. Leave it to me, Commander. I'll make sure they all die, Poison Heart declared. He flapped his wings and flew straight toward the source of the deep voice. He was so fast that the team's Tier 2 demon players didn't even have time to react. So fast. These invaders are dead now. The 3 adventurer team's members were astonished when Poison Heart vanished in the blink of an eye. Some of them even pitied Shifeng's team. Even working together, their teams wouldn't have been a match for Shifeng's people if they had attacked before the Battle Wolves Crusade, but after that fight, they had gained a bountiful harvest that had helped them undergo qualitative transformations. Now, with the great demon, Poison Heart, by their side, they were all confident that their teams could repel Battle Wolves' army by themselves, let alone a laughable team of 300+ experts. What a pity. It seems your companion is doomed, Flame Feather said, grinning as she brandished her axes at Fire Dance. I think you're the one that should pray for your friend. Fire Dance rolled her eyes at the other woman. I think you've misunderstood something from the very beginning. Misunderstood? And what would that be? Flame Feather asked curiously. I'm not responsible for killing that assassin. In fact, I hadn't even seen him before looting his body, Fire Dance said. I only came to collect the items. The 3 commanders immediately paled. What do you mean? You didn't kill 7 constellations? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You're not the monster he was talking about. Regretful Wind, Flame Feather, and Helpless Smile simultaneously recalled 7 constellations dying monster. Run quickly. If Fire Dance hadn't seen the assassin before he died, she couldn't be the monster he had warned them about. But before the 3 commanders could respond, they heard a series of explosions from the nearby forest, and the ground under their feet shook violently. After a few seconds, a colossal figure flew toward them, slamming into a nearby tree and felling it. The figure was none other than Poison Heart, who had just flown toward the other monster-level expert a moment ago. Chapter 25-26, Despair of 3 Adventurer Teams. Chapter 25-26, Despair of 3 Adventurer Teams. Poison? Regretful Wind was shocked when he saw Poison Heart's miserable figure lying at the base of the collapsed tree. Right now, the assassin was a bona fide Tier 4 being. He was even stronger than Tier 4 players. The man had command of every Tier 4 skill and spell a great demon possessed, which was an advantage that Tier 4 players wouldn't have. And yet, someone had thrown Poison Heart with an attack. When Flame Feather and Helpless Smile saw this, they found the scene incredibly familiar. They had encountered 7 constellations in the same way. Is the monster 7 constellations referred to in that area of the forest? Helpless Smile tensed as he recalled the other assassin's warning. They had gone to great lengths to corner Fire Dance, Yet just when they thought they had curbed the monster 7 constellations had warned them about, reality's punchline hit them. Flame Feather was also momentarily dazed over the unexpected revelation, and for a moment, she forgot about her fight with Fire Dance, very nearly letting the female assassin kill her. After a brief moment of silence, a man emerged from between the nearby trees. He was fully clad in pitch-black light armor and hid his appearance under a black cloak. 2 long swords hung from his belt, and the frightening amount of mana he radiated formed a layer of mist around his body. Within the burning forest, he looked like the Grim Reaper, and everyone who saw him felt chills crawl down his spine. The 3 adventurer team's main force members, who had been prepared to follow Poison Heart into battle, glanced back at their commanders. None of them were sure whether or not they should try to confront this invader. If this man had even thrown Poison Heart, who had transformed into a great demon, they'd suffer an even worse fate. It was highly likely that they'd die instantly, just like 7 constellations did. The mana he's radiating is practically even denser than Poison Heart's. Is he really just a tier 3 player? Flame Feather exclaimed when she saw Shifeng. Although determining a player's strength by the mana they radiated wasn't possible, the more mana wafting from one's body, the stronger their skills and spells would be. They'd also have higher physical stats and could more easily exhibit combat power beyond their limits. The amount of mana under his control was precisely the reason Poison Heart had felt omnipotent after reaching Tier 4. However, this Tier 3 swordsman commanded even more mana than Poison Heart did after his transformation. It was unbelievable. Could he have unlocked his mana body's full potential? Regretful Wind thought of a possibility as he sensed the immense amount of mana surrounding Shifeng. He couldn't think of any other reason that would let a Tier 3 player command so much mana. Is a fully unlocked mana body really this strong? Helpless Smile wondered, skeptical about Regretful Wind's guess. As demon players, unlocking their mana body's potential proved far more difficult than it was for human players because their body structure was completely different. Hence, Demon City's players hadn't paid much attention to their mana body's potential. They felt that raising their demon ranks was a better use of their time. Not even most great demons they came across had fully unlocked mana bodies. Demon players were also physically stronger than humans, and they controlled more. They simply didn't need to go to the trouble of unlocking their mana body's potential. As long as they raised their demon rank, they were more than powerful enough to suppress human players. But Helpless Smile had never dreamed that human players with fully unlocked mana bodies would be this strong. The amount of mana Shifeng controlled was enough to give him goosebumps. It was easy to imagine how powerful the swordsman's skills and spells would be. This isn't worth the trouble. Demon's Heart didn't offer nearly enough demon crystals for us to take on a monster like that. As Regretful Wind watched this Grim Reaper approach, he inwardly cursed the Dark Guild. If he had known that he'd have to fight a monster like this swordsman, he never would have led his team here. Even if they managed to defeat Shifeng, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. 3,000 plus demon crystals wouldn't even come close to compensating their losses. What are you afraid of? He's just one person. There's a limit to his stamina. Poison didn't even take that much damage. We can definitely wear him down if our main force members work together. As long as we defeat this assassin, we can take our time with the swordsman. Flame Feather shouted when she realized that the 3 adventurer team's main force members were cowering in fear. Her insistence snapped the main force members out of their daze, and they trusted that the commander was correct. Regardless of how powerful a player was, there was a limit to one's stamina. Shifeng was merely one person. No matter how strong he was, he couldn't kill them all. Aside from the 100 or so demon barons, they had over 5,000 demon experts with them. Their teams were more than capable of whittling Shifeng down. That's right. So what if he is strong? We still have a great demon on our side. We can just keep healing Poison Heart, and that guy won't be able to stop us. Kill him. His weapons and equipment will only strengthen our adventurer teams. Fighting spirit burned within the adventurer team's members, and they immediately moved into formation, slowly approaching Shifeng. No. Run. Everyone, get out of here. Poison Heart, who had just recovered from the crash, shouted, panicking as he watched his comrades move toward the human swordsman. They all turned toward the assassin, confused by the warning. They couldn't understand what he was trying to do. Did the man hit his head that hard? He's not alone. There's an entire team of monsters in those trees. Poison Heart hurriedly added. Before anyone could react, new figures began to appear behind Chiffon. The new arrivals concealed their levels and appearances under black cloaks, but their auras were horrifically intense. The several players leading the group had such a powerful combined aura that the adventurer team's members felt stifled. They felt even stronger than Grand Lords of the same level. Damn it! How is this possible? The blood drained from Regretful Wind's face when he saw the Hell Legion. Everyone, retreat! Retreat immediately! Both Fire Dance and Chiffon had suppressed their auras, so Regretful Wind hadn't been able to tell how strong they were. He could only guess based on his instincts and the mana they radiated. The Hell Legion members didn't bother to hide their auras, however. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. From the power Regretful Wind sensed, at least 5 of those human players were even stronger than Grand Lords of the same level, and even the weakest of the remaining members nearly rivaled Grand Lords. If their 3 adventurer teams tried to fight this group, it'd be a one-sided massacre. Hearing Regretful Wind's order, the stunned adventurer teams snapped out of their daze and fled in all directions like a flock of startled birds. Damn it! Run! Flame Feather did the same, fleeing the moment she saw Hell Rush and his companions. As she ran, a deep hatred for Demon's Heart blossomed in her chest. What a joke! The enemy team had at least 6 monster-level experts, and more than 300 of them could rival Grand Lords of the same level. This was no longer a force that Demon City's powers could take on individually. They'd only have a chance of defeating these intruders if they gathered all of the combat power in the city. Anyone that tried to fight these human players on their own would be digging their own grave. Escape! Don't you think it's a little late for that? When the 3 adventurer teams began to flee, Chiffon turned to the Hell Legion and growled, "Kill them, leave none alive." Chapter 25-27, Sweeping Victory. Chapter 25-27, Sweeping Victory. As soon as Chiffon gave the command, the Hell Legion pounced on the fleeing demon players like ravenous tigers. Although demonized players' physiques and basic attributes were superior to ordinary human players, and they could run much faster than humans, the Hell Legion's members were among the best in Netherworld Empire. Moreover, they had some of the best equipment available in God's domain at this stage of the game. Including their special bloodline, their basic attributes were even higher than the adventurer team's demonized members. The Hell Legion's experts caught up to the fleeing adventurer teams in no time at all. Damn it! They're too fast. You think you can bully me? I'll fight you to the death. I refuse to believe I can't defeat at least one of you. Realizing that escape was impossible, the adventurer teams turned and decided to stand up to the Hell Legion. Over 1,000 Tier 2 experts tried to meet the incoming Hell Legion experts, and although they knew they had a basic attribute advantage, they moved into defensive formations, with MTS on the front line and ranged players in the back. Their coordination was smooth, giving the Hell Legion's experts no chance to face them one-on-one. Skills and spells proceeded to fly toward the Hell Legion, adding colorful lights to the Crimson Forest. Boom! 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 As the attacks landed, countless explosions echoed throughout the forest, and thick smoke filled the area as if it had just been bombed from above. Trees caught in the crossfire were blown to smithereens. You guys might be powerful, but I refuse to believe that you can take so many attacks without taking damage. The 3 adventurer teams' attacking members looked smug when they saw that they had transformed part of the forest into an empty flatland. They also grew more confident about facing the Hell Legion. When they usually worked in teams of 100 or less, they were helpless against peak experts, but with over 1,000 players attacking in formation, they could launch a continuous assault on a single point. The Hell Legion members shouldn't think they could approach so easily. Before the adventurer teams could celebrate, however, the Hell Legion's members emerged from the cloud of smoke. Not one of the human experts had lost a single HP after the bombardment, much less suffered any severe injuries. Their steady advance seemed like those attacks had meant nothing to them. How is this possible? The 3 adventurer team's offensive members were stupefied. Even peak experts would have to take cover against their frenzied attacks, yet these experts continued to advance like nothing had happened. They hadn't pushed them back in the slightest. In fact, the Hell Legion was even closer now. The adventurer team's main force members, who had long since fled, shook their heads at the scene. How can anyone think those experts would be so easy to defeat? Players that hadn't yet reached Tier 3 simply couldn't understand how terrifying Tier 3 players were. That bombardment wouldn't even have damaged the adventurer team's Tier 3 players, much less the Hell Legion. With the extraordinary physique and basic attributes Tier 3 players had at their disposal, evading most Tier 2 players' skills and spells was a piece of cake. Even if they couldn't dodge the more flexible and accurate attacks, they could block them. Without tremendous power, Tier 2 players would have an incredibly hard time dealing damage to a Tier 3 expert. At worst, they'd only lose some stamina and concentration. In an instant, the Hell Legion's experts arrived before the adventurer team's frontline MTS streaks of light struck the MT's vitals, dealing hundreds of thousands of damages and plundering all of the MT's HPs. From afar, it looked like the MTS had been cursed as they fell, one after another. Over 1,000 experts from the 3 adventurer teams had fallen in just a dozen or so seconds. The remaining players, who had pondered staying for the fight, gasped. They had already known the difference between the two sides' combat power was massive, but they had never dreamed that it would be this huge. Every player that had chosen to fight had fallen in the initial clash. Only the adventurer team's main force members weren't surprised. In truth, the Hell Legion didn't just have incredible basic attributes, their combat standards were also absurdly high. Unlike Shifeng and Fire Dance, the Hell Legion's experts made no attempt to hide their combat standards, which made it easy for the main force members to notice. Meanwhile, from what they could tell, even the weakest human player of the team had reached the Flowing Water Realm, while most of the Hell Legion had reached the Void Realm. The 3 adventurer team's commanders had only recently reached the Void Realm, and none of their teammates had caught up to them. The Hell Legion continued to cull the 3 adventurer teams like the Grim Reaper himself. Their assault was unstoppable. The adventurer teams didn't even have the chance to buy their commanders any time. At this point, only the 3 commanders and Poison Heart, who was still a Tier 4 Great Demon, had any chance of escape. However, Shifeng, Hell Rush, and the others had suppressed the 4 demon players, who rapidly lost HP. In less than 10 minutes, the forest floor was covered in several thousand demon player corpses. None of the 3 adventurer team's members had gotten away with their lives. Demon City, Demon's Heart's residence. Commander Troubled, what do you think of the training room we've constructed? Furious Heart asked, smiling as he gestured to the marble building before him. It's amazing. The darkness energy seeping from it is already so dense. If demon players train in the building, they'll most likely climb to the Baron rank very quickly. They might even meet the conditions to reach the Viscount rank, Troubled Times surmised, shocked as he examined the training room bathed in darkness energy. Raising their nobility ranks wasn't easy for demon players. Not only did they need enough demon crystals, but they also needed to pass a test. Aside from their combat power, players would be tested on their ability to manipulate darkness energy. Unfortunately, even in demon territories, areas with dense darkness energy were incredibly rare, so demon players didn't have many opportunities to control high amounts of darkness energy. The Dark Den was a special case since many areas of the otherworld were rich in darkness energy and helpful to demon players as they trained. However, Demon's Heart had successfully constructed its own training room, containing an abundance of darkness energy. The guild's foundations were nearly unshakable. This training room will even be helpful to those trying to secure their Count rank, not to mention Viscount rank, Furious Heart said, chuckling. However, our guild has spent most of the darkness crystals and primal darkness stones we've accumulated thus far to construct the room. I see. That's why its darkness energy is so dense. Realization dawned on Troubled Times. Darkness crystals and primal darkness stones were both far more valuable than magic crystals and mana ore. Both items contained high amounts of darkness energy and were significantly helpful to demon players. However, these darkness-attuned crystals and ores were immensely difficult to obtain. Players were rarely willing to invest them in a large training room's construction. We've only accomplished the feat thanks to the alliance our Vice Guild leader has secured. He is currently in the midst of negotiating our continued partnership, and if he succeeds, he intends to share a portion of the resources with the Sentinel Shelter. You might even be able to construct a training room for yourselves, Furious Heart said. Really? Troubled Time's eyes glowed at the prospect. If the Sentinel Shelter could construct its own darkness-attuned training room, even if it were only a small training room, he wouldn't have to worry about his shelter's development. The Sentinel Shelter might even become strong enough to rule over all of the Dark Den, not to mention becoming the #1 shelter. MHM. Furious Heart nodded, smiling. Once you grow a little stronger, the Vice Guild leader also intends to provide enough resources for you to become a demon count. You will stand at the peak of God's domain, Commander Troubled. Elder Heart, please inform Vice Guild leader Flaming Light that he has nothing to worry about. The Sentinel Shelter will not disappoint him. I guarantee that we will become Demon's Heart's second major city, Troubled Times said. He could not help his growing excitement when he heard that Demon's Heart would help him with his promotion to Demon Count. Becoming a Demon Count wasn't an easy task. Once a Demon player earned the Count rank, their strength would undergo a qualitative transformation. Like in the various NPC kingdoms and empires, players were considered high nobles once they reached the rank of Count and above, enjoying unimaginable status. As a Count, Troubled Times was sure he could even defeat Shafong. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Just as Furious Heart was about to continue, however, a Tier 3 assassin frantically approached him. Elder Heart, we just received information regarding Zero Wing, the assassin hesitantly reported. It seems the 3 adventurer teams finally found them. Zero Wing certainly knows how to hide, Furious Heart said, smiling. Well, what's the situation? Have Zero Wing's members been dealt with? No. Windtooth, Eternal Night, and Crimson Sands teams have been annihilated, the assassin said, shaking his head. Grimly, he continued, a dozen or so medium adventurer teams and several dozen small adventurer teams have also been eliminated. Tens of thousands of players have died in the burning forest. As for the several hundred scouts we've dispatched, none have returned alive, but according to their offline reports, Zero Wing's members are nearly at Demon City's gates. They'll likely reach the city's entrance in about 10 minutes. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.